Hi,
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Tim.
This is my first time. Hi.
Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Good.
Really enjoyed last week, Tim.
Thank you.
I couldn't get on for some reason. It was my first time and I just couldn't get on. I was so upset. But now I'm on.
You're here, so that's good.
I'm here.
A little warm out today.
Yes. I bought the last Cabalist of Lisbon,
Okay.
and it's very good. It reminds me very much, though, of People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you read that. That's about the Sarajevo Haggadah that was saved
Right.
during the fight, but it's fictionalized, and there's a big section in it in Spain where it was illustrated. It's really, really, really good book.
Well, the last Kabbalist is, I find it's so disturbing because there's so much violence and so much, about, how people were treated during the Inquisition. So at times I find I just have to put it aside for a little bit. It's very good and it's very well done. And I'm enjoying it as much as you can enjoy a book on that subject, I guess. But apparently that writer lives in Porto, which is where we are moving.
Oh.
And one of the congregants at Mikveh Israel has actually become friends with him. And so is going to try to set up a way that we can actually meet him, and talk to him, which is great because most of my career, I was an English teacher. So, I like literature and I like books and I like writing and all of that. So putting it together with the whole Jewish thing and the whole history thing and whatever, it would be wonderful to sit down and share some coffee with him.
Well, I really recommend People of the Book. It's actually better written, but still deals with the same theme.
Right. I'll definitely look it up. I may need a break after this heavy book to something lighter, and then I'll go to that one. I try to vary my reading. If I read something really heavy, then I try to lighten it up a little bit. Then I can go back to a heavy duty book again.
Yeah. Well, the People of the Book is not really heavy.
Right.
It's a fictionalized history of the Haggadah that they saved.
Okay.
It's beautifully written.
I'll definitely put it on my list of books to read is always very long. Because people are always recommending a title, an author, something they read. And I just keep adding it to the list. And I figure at some point I'll get to it. I just love to read. So, as soon as I finish one book, then I sometimes start another book.
Yeah, well, I was an English teacher also. How many of you read books under the covers with a flashlight? Raise your hand.
Oh, yeah. I used to get in trouble. When I was a kid because I wouldn't put the books down, And my parents, well, my mother particularly, my parents were both readers. They kind of modeled the idea of reading for us as kids. But I can remember, we went to the public library, which luckily was within walking distance of our home, every 2 weeks. And my mother would make sure that we checked out, the appropriate number of books. And she wasn't content that we just read them. She would quiz us on the books to make sure that we read them. She would ask us questions about the books, and it was like, I didn't mind because I loved reading. So that was never, and I come from a family of readers. Even all my brothers, we all enjoyed reading.
It's the greatest gift you can give a child is the love of reading.
Yes, most definitely. And you can learn so much and it opens so many different worlds, to you and, learning about other people, cultures, and history and whatever. You can learn about anything. You want to read about music, you can read about music,
Well, you sound like a teacher now.
Oh, I don't think I've ever
lose it.
Even when I stopped teaching traditionally in school, 33 years, I don't think teachers ever completely take their teaching hat off.
Yeah, always motivated.
Or lose their or lose their teacher voice to the back of the room.
No. I mean, you go into teaching partly because you love the whole notion of learning and opening doors and all of that. I just got into a very heated discussion on Facebook, of all places, about homework and homework's place in education and all of that. And, you know, I gave my opinion as a classroom teacher of 33 years. I thought, I guess I can speak to this a bit, you know. So welcome everybody who's joining.
Tim, on another subject,
I
could
don't
you talk
know,
about, what is your,
What? Go ahead, Larry.
I was going to ask you about what is your status now?
As
Are you going to mention
Portugal?
it? Yeah.
Oh yeah. We have right now we have our paperwork in for the FBI background check, which is essential. We're putting together, we have our visa application. Interestingly enough, the visa application is all in Portuguese. So we had an expat advisor, so we Zoomed with her in Lisbon, so she could translate for us to make sure we filled everything out properly. So we've got that paperwork finished. We've got pretty much most of we have a lease on an apartment in Portugal.
Wow.
So yes.
When does that start, your lease?
We have to actually start the lease in June because you have to prove you have accommodations before they'll grant you a visa, permanent visa.
What city are you going to?
Porto. So yeah, it's moving along. We had, well, I think everybody knows our house sold very quickly, but luckily the people that are buying it, we've negotiated to stay in it until August, so that's good. We also
Will the FBI be calling us to vouch for your credentials as a good citizen here?
I don't know.
Is there any?
They might. I had to put down, Congregation Mikveh Israel as my employer, all of that. So you never know. And then we had a house sale, moving sale, whatever you want to call it, this past weekend to sell off things, and we sold a lot. We sold, so much, and I'm not good at that kind of thing. I could have never had a job in retail. It would have never been a good thing for me. But yeah, we sold. So it's all moving along. I mean, we're making progress. And once we get the FBI background check, then we send everything in to the consulate for the visa. And then they pretty much, that's kind of like a rubber stamp as long as you have all of your documents in order.
Are you bringing stuff with you, or are you storing a lot of things?
We are taking very little. We are taking artwork, because we have a lot of artwork from artists that we know. So that's going with us. We are taking some of our Jewish ritual items with us. We are taking some books and some cookbooks. And people kind of they said, bring some kitchen implements with you. So we're doing that. But major furniture, no. Our apartment that we have rented is furnished.
Did you need an FBI check because it's a residence visa rather than just a short-term tourist visa?
Exactly, yes. The D7, which allows residency, that's why you have to have the background check. Even though I've had FBI background checks when I was teaching, when we had the wine bar, I had an FBI background check because if you're going to sell alcoholic beverages, you have to have an FBI background check. So they have my fingerprints on file several times, but they want another one. So, those are the rules, and you do what they tell you to do, because I don't want them sending it back and saying you didn't follow the procedures. You have to write a statement, like a little personal essay as to why you want to live in Portugal. It's very, there's a very step-by-step sort of documentation that you have to provide, and we're doing that. So
I asked, what was your statement? What was the main reason why you wanted to go?
Adventure.
Perfectly valid.
Yep. I mean, it's a chance to learn a whole new culture, a cuisine, a language. Plus, as once you have a visa from Portugal, which is good for the EU, we can travel freely in the EU anywhere we want to go.
Yeah, that's gonna be fun. Right. Have you ever been to Europe before?
No.
No. Oh my gosh, what an adventure! Then
So we plan to take trips into Spain, into southern France, into Italy. We have friends that are moving to Amsterdam, so we can take the train to see them in Amsterdam.
Perfect.
It's going to be exciting. So,
Well, you know,
Tim,
the
just a
rabbi-
question.
yes.
Good evening. A question about the fingerprints. Did they change from time to time? I mean, did you have your fingerprints replaced?
I'm not going to answer that question on the grounds that it might incriminate me. I'm pleading the fifth on that one.
You know, the rabbi usually does those, I don't know if he still does them, those Tuesday afternoon interviews. And he interviewed a couple of months ago, he interviewed one of the girls, young lady who went to Israel and made Aliyah there. And I think you'd be a terrific candidate after you've been in Portugal for a couple of months to have him interview you.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting because there's a great deal of Jewish history in Portugal. There's so many things that you can visit related to Jewish history in Porto, in Lisbon, all over the place. So yeah, it will be interesting. And we're going to be very honest about the ups and downs because I'm sure we're going to make some mistakes. I'm sure we will. I mean, how can you go to a completely new country and culture and not make a few mistakes along the way? But you know what? I'm okay with sharing those. I'll share the mistakes. I'll share the ups and downs, the goods, the bads, you know. We're going to try and learn Portuguese, and I'm sure that's going to be a challenge in and of itself. You know, it's not an easy language to learn. Everybody says, "Oh, if you know a lot of Spanish, you can probably do." It's very different. It's very different from Spanish.
Well, you can read it easier because of your Spanish, but the whole talking and the accent throws you off.
Yes.
But everybody says the easiest way to learn it is just to listen and observe when you're out. You know, listen to what people say so you can learn basic phrases like ordering a coffee in a coffee shop or, you know, asking for directions on the metro or whatever. But we are actually going to enroll in a class once we get there too. Yeah. So we'll have formal class, and we already have found a Portuguese cooking class that we're going to take as well. So we'll learn food. And of course, we are living in the heart of the wine district in Portugal. So we'll learn the wine and the cheese. It's all sounding really good, you know.
What's your limit for weight gain the first 6 months?
No, interestingly enough, everybody says that moving to Portugal, most people lose between 10 and 15 pounds. Not because you're eating poorly, because their food, they have so little preservatives in their food. So you're not getting all of that extra stuff. And most people walk a lot. You know, you're walking a lot more than, you know, they're a very, very walking culture. It's an old city. The streets are narrow. You can't even get some US cars down the streets there. So everybody says you eat really well, you drink great wine, but you actually lose 10 to 15 pounds, which I'm like, I'm all about that. All right, I'm going to get started at 6:35. I always give us 5 extra minutes, so I'm going to mute everybody. And as always, if you want to ask a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. If you want a little clarification on something along the way, let's just, we kind of know the rules. So we're talking about the Jews of Spain today. And the Jews of Spain, it's a very, very interesting history. Those of you who took one of my classes in the past, we did a whole class on the Jews of Poland, and Jewish life in Poland certainly had its share of ups and downs. Jewish life in Spain also has its moments of grandeur and glory, and its moments of real heartbreak and sadness as well. So when we're looking at the Jews of Spain, just a couple of quick things. We date Jewish civilization on the Iberian Peninsula, which is where Spain and Portugal are located, that there were Jewish civilizations going all the way back to biblical times. So we're talking about a very, very long period where Jews were living in the Iberian Peninsula. It was at one time it was the home of the largest and the most prosperous Jewish community in the world. So if you were looking for a Jewish community that was doing very, very well, you wanted to go to the Iberian Peninsula, and you wanted to be part of the Spanish or the Portuguese Jewish community. Jewish people in Spain gave so much to the world in so many different ways. There were Jewish leaders in science, in literature, specifically poetry in particular, philosophy, in medicine, and interestingly enough, the Jews were so highly regarded at certain points in Spanish history that Jews were even appointed to leadership roles in the military, in the army, which was something that was kind of unheard of. But Jews actually did get leadership in the Spanish military. And there were people who reported directly to the royal family, to the king, because they were helping to defend the Spanish nation. It was something pretty rare for Jews in most European nations to be given that amount of prestige and that amount of power. If we're looking at Spain today, just to kind of bring it up to date, Spain has the smallest number of Jews of any Western European nation, interestingly enough. It is estimated, and this is an interesting estimate, and why it is so wide, I don't know. But if you look at the estimates of Jewish population in the country of Spain today, between 13,000 and 50,000. So again, that's 13,000 to 50,000 Jews making their homes in Spain today. In a country of about 74, 75 million people, that's not a very large percentage of population. It's relatively small. The Jewish communities are primarily centered in Madrid, which is the capital of Spain. In Barcelona, has a fairly sizable Jewish community. And then in the city of Malaga also has a fairly sizable Jewish community. There are synagogues in many, many Jewish communities in Spain, and in many cities in Spain. The reality of many of those synagogues is there's nobody going to them. They have been restored for historic purposes. They have been restored because of architectural purposes, artistic reasons, but they are not viable running congregations with people and a rabbi and worship services every single week. So Spain still is relatively small number of people who of Jews decide to make their home in Spain when you compare it to Jewish communities in countries like France, Italy, et cetera, where Jewish communities are much more considerable. All right, so let's look at the early history of Jews arriving in Spain. It is said that pretty much the first arrival of Jews into Spain came at the time of the destruction of the first temple. So Jews arrived in Spain, the temple had been destroyed the first time. The first destruction of the temple is when we see this migration, this diaspora of Jews out of the Middle Eastern region into the Iberian Peninsula, into what today we know as Spain. And there would be a fairly continuous migration to Spain, even considering during the Babylonian captivity. So once the first Jewish settlers came to Spain, there continued to be this migration. Of course, there was the Mediterranean Sea. And you have to understand that at this time, Spain was about as far as anybody ventured. People were not, this is before anybody's venturing beyond the Mediterranean. We know that later on, Spain and other countries, European nations, will send explorers out across the Atlantic. But at this time, Spain was about as far west as anyone dared to go. So these diaspora Jews who were leaving the Middle East and leaving after the destruction of the temple were really going to what at that time was considered to be the far ends of the earth. That was to be, it's considerably taking a risk to go that far. Shipping at that time just didn't go any further than that. That's where it ended. That's where it stopped. It would be a while until there would be the exploration beyond what we know as the Atlantic Ocean today. Early on, in these early settlers, these early Jewish settlers that came to Spain, that migrated to Spain, tended to mix pretty freely with the local population of people that were living there. There did not seem to be any animosity toward these early Jewish residents of Spain. Things went pretty smoothly. It really wouldn't be until Christianity became the officially adopted religion in the area, that there would begin to be some elements of trouble. Prior to that, the Jews who were living there had a fairly good existence, a fairly peaceful existence. They were able to find employment. They were able to, own homes, have their community, their worship, and things were good. The minute Christianity became the adopted religion of the state, then we're going to have trouble. In the years 305 to 306, there was a synod. Now, the Catholic Church has these meetings of the bishops of the church, and they will come together to discuss matters of religion. But at this time, religion was also very mixed up in politics and in the state. So there was the Synod of Elvira. And we're not talking about that old country song, if that's what you're thinking here. The Synod of Elvira in 305, 306. This would be the first formal declaration of anti-Semitism in Spain. So they passed these edicts, they called them, laws, rules, regulations, however you want to phrase it, that clearly spelled out some trouble for the Jews who were living in Spain. It said that anybody who was not Jewish, there could be no intermarriage. It forbade any sort of intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews. They even went so far as to forbid dining between Jews and non-Jews. So you could not have, if you had friends who happened to be Jewish and you weren't Jewish, you could no longer have them over for dinner, at least not legally. So it kind of would hark later to some of the kind of rules and regulations that Adolf Hitler would have in Nazi Germany. But this was the first time that there was some sort of formal declaration of anti-Semitism against the Jews living in Spain. So that was the Synod of Elvira. These were bishops of the Roman Catholic Church who, for whatever reason, decided that they were going to make life difficult for the Jews living in Spain. Now, between the 5th century and until about the year 711, so from the 5th century until 711, there were various rulers that were the Visigoths. The Visigoths were not fans of the Jews either. When they came into power in Spain, or what today is Spain, they also decided that they really were not happy with Jews living in the land that they were now in charge of. So they also passed various restrictions against Jews. There were forced conversions. Under the Visigoths, they would force Jews to convert to Christianity. Certain towns were considered off limits to Jews, so they regulated which towns and which communities where Jews could live. And in some places under the Visigoths, they would even outlaw Jewish ritual observance. For example, they would outlaw the public reading of the Torah. There could be no public reading of the Torah. Worship services were outlawed. And in fact, it was, and if you're some of you who've taken the past class, you remember that the reason that we started adding Haftarah readings into the service in synagogue is because when the Torah could not be read, we were allowed to read from the prophets, which is the readings of the Haftarah. So we were not allowed to read from the Torah, but we could read from the prophets because probably, I guess, we shared some of those prophets with Christianity. I don't know. So that's how the Haftarah readings got built into the synagogue service when Torah readings were forbidden. So the Visigoths were certainly not fans of the Jews. They were not making life for the Jews in Spain easily, and it was a pretty oppressive time. Jews had to be very careful about being public with their observances, about being public with their prayers. It was the time when you kept a very, very low profile if you were Jewish and living in Spain. And then something would happen, interestingly enough, that would be a sense of liberation. And that is in the year 711, there was an Islamic invasion from North Africa into Spanish land. And these Islamic invaders were hailed as liberators by the Jews. And that may sound strange because today we see the problems between Islam and Judaism. We certainly look over to what's going on right now in the Middle East, and it certainly isn't a pretty sight. But the Jews saw these Islamic invaders coming from North Africa as being liberators. Why? Why were these Islamic invaders thought of as being sort of freedom fighters for the Jews? The Spanish Jews knew that the Moors coming from North Africa, these Islamic Moors, were far more tolerant of differences than the Visigoths. They had a reputation for being a far more tolerant people. There are even some historians who claim that the Spanish Jews were sort of secretly complicit in helping the invasion to be successful, so that they even sort of quietly behind the scenes did some sort of aid or help to the Islamic invaders to see that the Moorish invasion of Spain would be successful. Again, there's not a whole lot of proof of that, but there are historians who think that that very likely, at least in some areas of Spain, could have been the case. So you have these Moors coming in, they are followers of Islam, but they are certainly much more willing to be tolerant of those of other faiths, those of other belief systems than the Visigoths were. So under the Moors and under this Islamic invasion, this is when we would have the golden age. There would be a golden age of Spain. And in this golden age of Spain, you would have Islam would be thriving, Judaism would be thriving, Christianity would be thriving. And the three different belief systems, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, would live together in Spanish territory and do so pretty harmoniously overall, and create this rather brilliant society that would take great leaps forward in many, many areas, because there was this cooperation and because there was this sense of respect between, or among, really, since there were three, among the three belief systems. The Muslims regarded the Jews as dhimmis, and I think I put that on your outline. Dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I-S. Dhimmis were any non-Muslims. So it could be Christians, it could be Jews, but dhimmis were any non-Muslims that are living in an Islamic state. But there's more to it than that. They're not just people living in an Islamic state, they are also granted legal protection and they are granted freedom of religion. So any group of people that was given dhimmi status by Islam had the right to practice their religion freely, to worship openly and freely, and they were given legal protection. In addition,
they paid the tax.
What? Let's get there.
Paid the tax.
In addition, they were given protection for their property. Their property would be protected, but yes, as Jeff did say, there was a tax that they had to pay for this. But most realized that for protection of religion, for protection of their land, their property, for protection, legal protection by the government, it was a fairly small price to pay because you weren't going to be murdered, you weren't going to be forced to convert, you weren't going to be kept out of living in certain parts of the nation. So it really, and actually if you translate the word dhimmi from Arabic, the translation from Arabic means protected person. So a dhimmi is a protected person. So they did have legal protection under the rule of this new Moorish Islamic government. So this is a great step forward for all three religions, for Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So at this point, we have this golden age being ushered into Spain. The population of Jews in Spain actually grows during this period. Jews are allowed to mingle freely with the diversity of people who are living in the Spanish territory and under the Spanish rulers who are now Islam. The study of Torah by the Islamic leaders was actually encouraged. So after being forbidden under the Visigoths, the Islamic leaders now were saying they were encouraging the study of Torah. They were encouraging the study of Hebrew and the speaking of Hebrew among the Jews. In addition, many Jews, interestingly enough, decided to learn Arabic. So now you had the Jews who were learning the Arabic language. Why? Because much of the education in Spain at that time was being conducted in Arabic. So by learning Arabic, the Jews would open up the world of education, specifically as it came to science and as it came to medicine. So there was a plus for the Jews to not only know Hebrew, but also to have a good understanding and a good knowledge of speaking Arabic. Jews were given opportunities in many professions under the Moors. Jews had jobs in commerce, so they could work in sales. They had jobs in the financial area as well. They were given jobs in universities, so they were a part of the educational system. There were Jews who were working in agriculture. And one of the most interesting facts that happened under the Moorish government, the Islamic government in Spain, is the Jews who had been converted away from Judaism, Jews were allowed to proselytize them and get them to return to Judaism, which was very interesting. So those Jews who had been forcibly converted away, they allowed the Jews to go to them and say, it's okay if you want to return now to your Jewish roots, if you want to return to Judaism as your religion, because you were forced to convert away from Judaism, which was really pretty remarkable that they were given free rein to do that. Now, I have no idea on how successful they were at that and how many people they were able to persuade to perhaps return to Judaism, but the mere fact that they were allowed to go to these people and even make the suggestion or make the idea that they return to Christianity or give up Christianity and return to Judaism was really pretty remarkable. So, yes.
How long did this period go on of this openness?
It goes on for a couple hundred years. So it has time to flourish. It has time to grow. It has time to, a generation to die out and a new generation to come up. So you're talking about a couple hundred years of this golden age in Spain where, life is very, very good for pretty much everybody who is living there, regardless of your religious background. And that included the Jews.
I'm sorry. How did the Christians take at this time to the Jews being so welcomed?
There was always a bit of an undercurrent of anti-Semitism from the Christians, but because life in Spain was really good for everybody, it really stayed under the surface. And Christians and Jews were able to work together in many of the different fields without there being any overt sort of hatred or overt animosity from one group toward the other. I mean, when life is good, you kind of don't want to rock the boat, I guess, would be the way to look at it. If people are doing well, they are successful, their families are safe, they are earning a living, they have educational opportunities, they have occupational opportunities. I guess the idea is you just really, really don't want to, make waves and upset the apple cart and everything falls apart at that point.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Yeah, Larry?
Yeah, Spain at that time was not what Spain is today, right? Spain is a unified country,
right.
Which I guess under Isabella and Ferdinand, I think it became unified. When was the first monarchy in Spain? There were no kings then in Spain?
They were primarily, at this point, it was a series of loosely, and I use that term loosely, sort of confederated principalities and caliphates that were sort of working together. Rather than having a one unified government, you would have a caliphate in some area that was primarily, and this was more southern Spain, where the Islamic rule was most pronounced. And then you had some principalities in what today would be northern Spain that were really more Christian than Islam. And it was sort of this loose confederation where, we're all working together because, as I said, we're all doing well. So let's just, make sure everybody's doing okay. So the northern part of Spain, it was some of the Christian principalities. Southern part of Spain was primarily the Moorish caliphates that were running things, but everybody sort of, respected everybody else. There were not really conflicts and wars at this time that were breaking out among the various caliphates and principalities. Okay, let's go on to a man who gets a little bit of special mention here, Abd ar-Rahman II, who lived from 1882 to 955. He was actually in charge of Cordoba, the Caliphate of Cordoba, which was one of the most prominent of the Moorish caliphates in what we call Spain today. And he was very highly regarded by the Jewish residents who were living under him. He really strongly encouraged the study of Hebrew. He is the one who encouraged writing Hebrew poetry. He had a great love of poetry, and he encouraged the writing of Hebrew poetry. He himself sponsored Jewish painters, Jewish artists. He sponsored Jewish craftsmen who were living in his caliphate. He wanted Cordoba to be the leading Jewish scholarly home in this area we call Spain today. So he encouraged Jewish students to study logic. He encouraged them to study philosophy. He encouraged them to study mathematics. He encouraged them to study legal ethics. So he was very, very prominent in backing success for the Jews who were living in the Caliphate of Cordoba. He really wanted to see all elements of Jewish society, including Hebrew, and specifically in poetry. He had this great thing for Hebrew poetry. He really wanted it to thrive. He wanted it to be successful. And so I guess you can look at him as this leader who looked at the people living under him and said, why do I want to hold people back? Why do I want to hold people from being, whatever they can be? And so he encouraged everyone, including the Jews living under him, to do whatever they could in terms of their education, in terms of their study of Hebrew, their writing of Hebrew, etc. So he gets kind of special mention because it was the Caliphate of Cordoba that really became the center sort of this golden age for the Jews of Spain. And so I just wanted to mention him because of that.
Tim, what was his name again? I'm sorry, I missed his name.
Abd, A-B-D, lowercase a-r hyphen, and then last name R-A-H-M-A-N, the second. So Abd ar-Rahman II, Roman numeral 2, after his name. So he really was this major supporter of his Jewish residents in the Caliphate of Cordoba. Once he would pass in 955, Jewish opportunities continued to flourish. It did not end with his death. What he had started continued. And the Jewish achievements that were made under him and following his death were honored by both the Muslim residents and the Christian residents. So here again, you have these three major religious groups who are all accepting the advances of each other for the good of everybody. So this sort of flourishing of all these different areas of study would continue even after he passed away. He set a standard that would continue for some time after his death in 955. Life would continue to be good for the Jews as well as the Christians and the Muslims who were living in what today we call Spain. And of course, as we know in life, all good things must come to an end. So here we have this flourishing community, and unfortunately, something is going to happen to tear it apart, and things are going to undergo a very, very difficult change. And that will be in the year 1066, with the Granada Massacre of 1066. It's a pogrom. I mean, there's no other way to talk about it. It is a pogrom. And it is responsible for the death, the murder, I'm going to say it what it is. It is responsible for the murder of nearly 4,000 Jews who were living in the area of Granada at that time. This was going to be the turning point from a golden age in Spain to a very, very perilous age in Spain. Clearly, when you have a pogrom of that size in a community with that large number of people being murdered, massacred, you have to realize that things are not going to be what they once were. So what happened? What happened in Spain that caused this shifting away from open-mindedness, from, celebrating the achievements of all the various and diverse groups that were living there? Something had to change. Well, there was another Muslim invasion in Spain. Very zealous, what we would call probably in today's terminology, extremist Muslims came in from North Africa, much more zealous, much less open-minded, much less willing to work with either Jews or Christians. And they came in and attacked from North Africa into southern Spain and began to, one by one, the more open-minded and enlightened caliphates fell to this more zealous, more extremist, and far more vicious armies of Muslims. And so the golden age would come to an end. As one by one, the leaders who were more open-minded were defeated, and these caliphates were taken over by very extremist Muslims who were not willing to have that same sense of, brotherhood, sisterhood with Jews and with Christians. So what happened to the Jews? What did they do? Well, many of them realized that they had really only one choice, and that was to flee. They needed to get out. Many of them fled north into northern Spain, to the Christian areas, the more Christian-dominated fiefdoms and principalities in northern Spain. So they picked up and took what they could, became refugees, and they went to the more Christian areas of northern Spain. The Christians who were in charge of these principalities in northern Spain were willing, at least for the time, to sort of put aside their suspicions of Jews, to put aside their subtle and sometimes not so subtle anti-Semitism, because they realized there was something to gain from it. These refugees from southern Spain, from the now much more fundamentalist Muslim caliphates, were bringing with them all of their intellectualism. They were bringing with them all of their knowledge. They were bringing with them all of their skill sets that they had learned. And this, of course, was going to be advantageous to these Christian principalities in the north. So we'll just sort of put aside the anti-Semitism. We'll put aside some of our suspicions of Jews, because this is going to be good for us. They also were smart enough to know that many of the Jews had learned Arabic, and that was going to be to their advantage as well. So the fact that many of the Jews knew Arabic fluently, they had all of this intellectual and the occupations that they had learned, and they were bringing this now into northern Spain. So that would be at least good for the Jews, at least for a time. It wasn't going to stay that way, but initially they had some respite in these Christian areas away from the very zealous Muslims who were willing to massacre them at a moment's notice. And then, of course, what happens in the year 1212? In 1212, you may recall learning in your world history class back in 6th or 7th grade, there were these things called the Crusades. You remember the Crusades? The Crusades, where, of course, I don't know how you learned it, but when I learned it, we learned that these Crusaders were these wonderful people who went off to fight to get back the Holy Land from the infidels. Of course, the infidels were at this time the Muslims, those who were practicing Islam. But as people, the papacy, the Pope called these Crusades to go and take back the Holy Land. He said, well, we have a long way to go. We're here in Europe and we've got to go all the way to the Middle East. That's a long way. So, why don't we murder some infidels along the way? And that's exactly what happened. I mean, I don't want to be crass about it, but let's murder the infidels who are living around us first before we set off to the Middle East to take the Holy Land back for Christianity, and we murder the infidels there. Well, the infidels were not just the Muslims, they were also the Jews, because they regarded the Jews as infidels, as non-believers, because the Jews did not accept Jesus Christ. So you have this rising up of these people at the behest of the Pope, who is saying, we've got to do this. You are called to do this. This is a holy mission on your part. And let's take care of the infidels around us first, and then we'll go off to the Middle East and we'll try to win back the Holy Land. And this all started in 1212. In the year 1212, there was, again, in Spain, a horrible, horrible pogrom in the city of Toledo. Now, I'm from Toledo, Ohio, initially, and that was named for Toledo, Spain, just as a side point. But this horrible, horrible pogrom in Toledo, in Spain, where hundreds and hundreds of Jews were beaten, robbed, and then ultimately killed. So once again, life for the Jews in what is known as Spain today was going to take another turn for the worse. Their position in Spain was now going to be very, very tenuous. Now, I want to make a little side point here. So you have these small little Christian principalities dotting northern Spain, each principality under a different leader. Some of the leaders were far less anti-Semitic than others. Some were brutal, and others were at least a bit more tolerant of the Jews who were living in their particular principality, in their particular region. So the Jewish residents kind of knew that they needed to be careful in where they were going to settle down, because certainly you wanted to be in some area where the local leadership was going to be far more accepting and at least somewhat more tolerant than other leaders who could be just as ruthless as the very fundamentalist Muslims who had taken over the South. So it became sort of a game as to where are you going to actually settle, at least temporarily, now that we have this sort of grouping of principalities, some of whom will be okay with us and some who are not so okay with us. The problem is all of these little principalities had rivalries. One particular family not liking another particular family. It could have created soap operas that we would call today. And these rivalries would oftentimes put the Jews right in the middle. And no matter what the Jews did, they really couldn't win. And while some of those rivalries, the families would protect the Jews, and in other cases, they would throw the Jews basically out there and you fend for yourself and you have to figure it out on your own. So you can see how tenuous the position was for Jews in these particular Christian-run areas of northern Spain. While all of this is happening, special taxes were levied against the Jews, which is something that different countries had always done. Jews were ghettoized. They could not live among their Roman Catholic neighbors, so they had to live in particularly designated areas of the city. So this is like ghettoization, another thing that Hitler would borrow during the Holocaust. Many of their prayer books, Jewish prayer books and other sacred writings and ritual items, religious items, were confiscated from them. So they did not have prayer books, they did not have ritual items for celebrating the holidays. They had to wear distinctive clothing or a distinctive badge. Again, another idea that Hitler would borrow during the Holocaust. And any Jews who were walking on public streets at certain times were fair game. If somebody wanted to lash out at you, if somebody who was Christian wanted to lash out at you, well, that's just the price you pay for being Jewish. So you can see how Jewish life kind of would go underground. Nobody wanted to put themselves at risk of a beating or some other horrible, heinous act. And particularly, Jews knew to keep extremely low profiles during Christian Holy Week. Holy Week, the Christian Holy Week, which starts from Palm Sunday, then goes through Good Friday, the day that they remember the death of Jesus, and through Easter Sunday, was probably the worst time for Jews. Jews did not want to really show themselves on the streets because that was a time of intense, because back then Catholic doctrine said very clearly that the Jews were to blame for the death of Jesus. And because Jews were to blame for the death of Jesus, this could whip up all sorts of crowds, animosity. And if you were a Jewish resident who happened to be on the streets and you encountered one of these crowds who were angry now because you had killed their Lord and Savior, well, it wasn't going to go well for you. So Holy Week was always a very, very difficult time in many societies for Jews, particularly in northern Spain at this time. We get to the year 1391. 1391 becomes a very, very difficult year for the Jews. The number of massacres and pogroms increases in these Christian principalities. Forced conversions start up again, where you are basically given the choice of convert to Christianity or die. There were all kinds of riots in the street. Many synagogues were destroyed, beautiful buildings, or if they did not want to destroy this synagogue, they would merely convert the building into a church. So either the synagogues were destroyed or they were converted into churches. In the city of Seville or Sevilla, if you want to be a little more Spanish about it, the entire Jewish quarter, the area where Jews were allowed to live, the entire Jewish quarter in Sevilla was burned to the ground, and every single Jew who was living there was murdered. No one survived in Sevilla. So you can see things are really, really going downhill. Even in the Christian North now, things have really gone from, well, we'll tolerate you, we'll sort of, at least in some areas, put up with you, into now we simply want to do away with you. You know, if that means that we have to massacre you, we have to kill you, well, then that's what we have to do.
Tim, question for you. So it sounds to me like now the Jews are being kind of squeezed out of southern Spain by this more radical Islamic element, and they're being kind of squeezed out of northern Spain by starting with the Crusades, by this, municipalities, as you call it. So they're kind of caught in the middle of the two. Is that what's happening here?
They're now, at least initially, they could go to the north. And like I said, they were tolerated fairly well at first. Now they're where they're going to go. There would be those who would try to flee into Portugal. At that time, Portugal was a little more accepting of Jews. That wouldn't last long. And some would try to get, of course, you have the Pyrenees Mountains, which separate Spain from France. And, traversing the Pyrenees Mountains on foot, regardless of what you see them going over the Alps and the Sound of Music at the end, is not an easy task. So yes, they're sort of hemmed in. And then you've got the ocean. So you've got the ocean, you've got the Pyrenees Mountains, you've got the very radical Islamic governments in the south. There's really no place to go. So yes, it's a very apt thing to say they're basically caught, they're stuck. And that's what creates this horrible, horrible situation for the Jews in Spain at this point.
Can I take one?
Sure.
Somebody mentioned they're an English teacher here. The Cervantes, Don Quixote, the Man of La Mancha.
Right.
He's kind of glorified as, this knight in shining armor, who saves Dulcinea, or at least, we're so familiar with the show. Was Cervantes then a spoof on the Crusades, or was he really showing Quixote as a kind of a hero?
There's a great deal of discussion on that in literary circles. My particular take on it was that there's nothing heroic there really, as that's my reading of it, but that's just me. There's a lot of people who would disagree with that. But that's just kind of the way I've always looked at it. I'm just going to be very honest with you, not a fan of the whole story. but you know, it has its detractors and it has its people who like it. And I don't, you know, I just have my opinion.
Was it written at a time to stir up nationalism in Spain, though, to kind of restore
I don't know that that's so much true, because there really at this point was not a great nationalistic tendency in Spain. That was still to come. It was on its way for a more unified kingdom of Spain. But even after Spain unifies, it still has these areas where different families are in charge. You know, a real unified Spain would still be a long, long way off, in spite of what, you know, Ferdinand and Isabella want us to think.
Tim?
Yeah.
You know, when you talked about the Crusades and on the way to the Holy Land, they would massacre the infidels, but it wasn't just the Jews and the Muslims. When they got close to Jerusalem, they massacred the Christians there, the Coptic Christians, because they did not believe as the church believed. They had this, their religious beliefs did not include the Trinity concept.
Right.
So they were, yeah.
They were
So
equal opportunity. They were equal opportunity massacre people.
Right.
If
So
you didn't agree with them, hook, line, and sinker, then pretty much you were on the outs with them. You're right.
Richard the Lionhearted, you
Right.
know, who of course is portrayed in the Robin Hood classics. He was one of the great butchers of all time.
Oh, yes.
On the Crusades.
Oh, yes.
You
Yes,
had mentioned
the Crusades were nothing to be proud of. Let's just say that, in spite of what some history books would like you to believe.
You had mentioned Cordoba before as kind of like the center of Jewish learning, and of course that's Maimonides' territory, right?
Right.
And but he basically escaped, and not escaped, but I mean he went to Egypt, right? And did he see the handwriting on the wall before, or because he lived at around this time when it would have been the golden age? What made him leave? Are you familiar with that? What made him leave?
From what
Spain?
I know, and I'm not a scholar in Maimonides by any stretch of the imagination, but from what I know, he did have a sense that things were going to get worse. I don't know if he knew how bad it was going to be, and maybe just had enough sense to think, let me get out while I can still get out. Because at some point, there's, like you can see now, there's nowhere to go. So my take on what I know, and as I said, I'm no scholar, is that he sensed a changing of the guard, if you will, and decided to leave before things really took a horrible, horrible turn for the worse.
Yeah, there's a wonderful monument to him with a beautiful statue in Cordoba, and people go there and
Yes.
rub the hand and the feet or something like that, as I recall. So
Right.
he's still well regarded, at least in the.
Oh, for sure. He was brilliant. He was brilliant.
In Spain, though, yeah.
All right, let's move on to, so we've got this horrible massacres, horrible pogroms, and then we are going to finally get to our friends Isabella and Ferdinand, Queen Isabella and Ferdinand, who about 100 years after the 1391 massacres begin and then continue following, will sign the Edict of Expulsion. The Edict of Expulsion gave the Jews really three options: leave, of course, where are you going to go? Convert, or die. Those were your choices. They were hoping to make now the alleged unified kingdom of Spain completely free of Jews. So you will convert, you will become Christian, you will leave, assuming you have a place to go to, or, of course, we can kill you. Now, this is a point where the border between Spain and Portugal was overrun with Jews fleeing into Portugal, because for the next couple of years, Portugal would be a better refuge, a better place than Spain. But just so you know, Portugal would issue its Edict of Expulsion only 4 years later in 1496. So it didn't last long. So the Edict of Expulsion in Spain in 1492, which of course the same year as Christopher Columbus and all that, and then the Edict of Expulsion in Portugal in 1496. So again, once again, we have this horrible, horrible situation. There were those who chose to convert, to undergo baptism, to become Christians. But these are the people, and this is where it gets very fascinating. Many of these people who chose conversion, at least on the surface conversion, became what we today refer to as the crypto Jews. The crypto Jews, those Jews who would profess Christianity in public on the streets, but secretly behind closed doors and closed windows and closed curtains, or in back rooms or basements or whatever, would continue to practice Jewish rituals as best they could and continue to observe Jewish holidays as best they could. Now, there was very grave danger in this, because if anybody found out, saw you, turned you in to the local authorities, etc., you knew what was going to happen to you. So you could, on the public streets, make your sign of the cross and say your Hail Mary full of grace. But secretly, when the doors were closed and nobody was looking, you could still be lighting Shabbat candles and reciting Hebrew blessings over the Shabbat candles, etc. So these were the crypto Jews. They, on the surface, looked to be Christian, and in public looked to be Christian, but continued to practice their Judaism in secret as best they could. Wasn't easy, because you did not have access to Jewish items, so you had to do the best you could, but you tried. It is estimated that there were over 300,000 of these crypto Jews at one point in Spain. Those who were on the surface Christian, but were still practicing Judaism behind closed doors. So that's quite a large number. Yes, Flossie. Can't hear you.
Wait a minute, we're being
Okay.
on. We're on.
Here you go.
Is converso the same as a crypto Jew?
Yes, the terms get used kind of interchangeably. My reading has come recently, the term crypto Jew seems to be now the more preferred term. Okay, we've gone through different terminology on this, and as my reading of recent things uses the term crypto Jew much more often than converso. And I guess because converso suggests that maybe they really did convert, and while they went through the motions of converting, they really didn't convert, at least in their heart of hearts, they didn't convert. So, it is a matter of terminology, and we simply don't use the word Marrano anymore at all. That word has gone out the door. We just don't use it. So you have Jewish underground life basically going on in Spain at this point. The Jews that went to Portugal would be there. They then would be expelled. It was a horrible situation on the Iberian Peninsula for Jewish life. So for the next 3 centuries, after this expulsion, for the next 3 centuries, Jewish life in Spain pretty much came to a crawl. After this wonderful golden age of literature and medicine and science and mathematics and everything else, now this golden age completely over. The life of the Jews would be this underground sort of life with these crypto Jews. There were some who eventually just became openly practicing Catholics, where they felt they could not live the secret life anymore. So they simply embraced the Roman Catholic faith and began to practice the Roman Catholic faith. Those who decided that they still were going to try to hold on to Judaism. And remember, you're going through several generations now. So these ideas have to secretly be passed down from generation to generation. Those who continued to practice secretly, there was always suspicion. There was this idea of, they would call them old Catholics and new Catholics. Are you an old Catholic or are you a new Catholic? Well, the old Catholics were those who were Catholic by birth and had grown up in the Catholic Church and certainly had a complete understanding as best as possible of Catholic ritual. New Catholics were those who were converted Catholics. So are you an old Catholic or are you a new Catholic? And there was always some form of looking down upon new Catholics because, well, we know that you weren't Catholic at the beginning. We know you weren't originally a Catholic. And are you really a Catholic, or are you really secretly doing something else? There was always a great deal of suspicion that surrounded the new Catholics. So this country that had been a flourishing area of Jewish thought and Jewish culture for so long just basically came to a standstill. Finally, in the 1800s, so as I said, we're talking 300 some years or so, restrictions against the Jews would begin to ease. Now, they wouldn't completely go away. This wasn't like an opening of the door and, Jews were going to flock to Spain and it was going to all become good again. But there was easing of the open hostilities, the open anti-Semitism against Jews. And so slowly, very slowly, maybe by a trickle, some Jews began to return to Spain in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. There was a sort of movement of some Jews into Spain, but even then, the Jewish population of Spain was estimated at that time to only be about 6,000. 6,000. So it was still relatively small numbers. I mean, this was not an open door policy where Jews felt like they could come and live openly and have recreate the golden age of Spain. That wasn't going to happen. So we're into the 1900s. And of course, for those of you who know your history, there is going to be a Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. And during the Spanish Civil War, synagogues were shut down. They were closed. Okay. There wasn't open hostility on the streets against Jews, but the synagogues were closed. There was no activity. There was no worship in the synagogue. And of course, the dictator, Francisco Franco, was a fascist. I mean, plain and simple, he was a fascist. But unlike his fascist cohort Hitler, he didn't express this sort of immense anti-Semitism, this immense hatred of Jews. In fact, when you look at most of Franco's speeches and you look at most of his writing, he really mentioned Jews very, very little. They just didn't come up, good or bad. He just didn't, have this immense hatred. He just didn't buy into the whole Hitler line of, the Jews are our misfortune, and so we simply have to get rid of them. So once World War II started, and of course, then we would have the Holocaust, Spain was sort of this mixed bag of ideas. The Spanish government did not stop refugees from crossing the border into Spain. Those who could make it to the Spanish-French border as refugees out of Europe, seeking safety, they were not halted. The Spaniards were willing to let them cross the border and come to Spain. They really didn't encourage them to stay in Spain. They didn't encourage them to settle in Spain, but they allowed them to cross Spanish territory without any sort of hassles if they were, for example, trying to get to the seacoast and perhaps be able to escape that way. So there was not an open hostility of these people coming into the border, over the French border. Interestingly enough, the Spanish government, which at this time was Franco, the fascist, they actually sent ambassadors of the Spanish fascist government to Hungary and to Greece and offered protection to Jews that had Sephardic last names. So if you were a Sephardic Jew in Hungary, a Sephardic Jew in Greece, and had a Spanish or a Sephardic last name, the ambassador was going to be able to give you papers that would protect you, interestingly enough. Jews were allowed to cross Spain into Portugal. Then and this is why it's such a mixed bag. On the other hand, Nazi officials who were fleeing as the war wound down and was closing, and finally the Germans were defeated, Franco gave Nazi officials refuge as well. So here he's giving Jews the chance to pass through Spanish territory with no problem, but now he's taking in Nazi officials at the same time. So that's what I mean when it's like there's this mixed bag. One thing that was discovered after the war, after Franco was out of the picture, they found in his documentation of the Franco government that lists had been drawn up in each of the Spanish provinces that listed the names of all the Jewish residents. Now, nothing was ever really done with that because there was never a rounding up of Jewish residents, never a turning over of the Jews to the Nazis or whatever, but these lists were there. So was there at some point a plan to perhaps round up the Spanish Jews or something else? We don't know that. We don't know that. We just know that these lists were found among his papers after he was gone and after the war and whatever. So they had gone that far. And whether that was something he did to appease Hitler or whatever, again, I don't really have any knowledge of that. So now we've got a post-World War II Spain. And of course, the map of Europe is going to be very different now, with new borders, with new countries. And then we're going to have the communist influence in Eastern Europe, et cetera. And Spain is going to try to become a more democratic nation, much like its other Western European neighbors. It would take some time, and there are some who will say it's still not there yet, who study Spanish ideas today, say Spain is still working toward a democracy even today. I guess I'll leave that up to the political scientists to debate. But what's interesting is it wasn't until 1968, when I was already alive, on December 16th, 1968, the decree, it was called the Alhambra Decree, that expelled Jews from Spain back in 1492, was finally formally rescinded. So that decree expelling Jews out of the country stood on the books until 1968. So it wasn't until 1968 that was finally taken off the books, but had sat there for all that time. So is it any wonder that Jews were not flocking to Spain to set up communities there? Spain would finally recognize Israel as a sovereign nation in 1986. However, the reason Spain had been reluctant, as you can see, 1986 was quite a while. Why was Spain reluctant? They just weren't yet ready. That's why some people claim they're still working toward democracy. But they finally did it in 1986 because they were told, you can't join the EU. We will not permit Spain to be part of the European Union. We will not let you into the European Union unless you recognize the sovereignty of Israel as a nation. So it was kind of a bargaining chip, I guess, if you will. You recognize Israel, the Spanish government recognized Israel, and then we will permit you to join the EU. The Spanish population today Jewish population in Spain is estimated to be about 50,000. Small, very small. Now, the one handout I gave you, which I found utterly fascinating, maybe you didn't, but I did, and I actually read it through several times, is this Spain attempting to atone for its wrongs. From golden to, no, the one, Spain's attempt to atone for a 500-year-old sin, written by a woman who does have Sephardic background in her family that had lived in Spain. And Spain decided that in the year 2014, they were going to allow those who could prove with documentation that you had been part of a Sephardic family that had been expelled from Spain way back in the 1400s, you were going to be granted automatic citizenship in Spain. But if you read through her article, they didn't make it easy. There are so many hoops to jump through, and relatively few people have actually taken up the cause of trying to regain their Spanish citizenship. Relatively few people have applied. And interestingly enough, they put a deadline on it. We're only going to open up this offer for a certain time period, then it's over, then it's done. Interestingly enough, Portugal has done the same thing. Portugal has likewise said that you can become a Portuguese citizenship or get Portuguese citizenship if you can prove descent from the Sephardic Jews who were expelled in 1496. They've never ended theirs. It's still ongoing, even today. you can still apply for it even today in Portugal, even though Spain has ended theirs. And the last I read in Portugal, over 30,000 have applied for Portuguese citizenship from dating back to the Inquisition, but they're still taking and accepting new paperwork and new cases in Portugal where the Spanish have not. I just found this whole thing and her take on it to be a rather fascinating look at. And I think, again, this is why some political scientists say that Spain is still trying to become a Western democracy and hasn't quite achieved it yet. Because they still haven't been able to, and the whole idea of the anti-Semitism that still seems to be so ingrained in some elements of Spanish culture, where they use anti-Semitic terms very loosely and in a way that they think is kind of funny when they're speaking about certain things. Of course, I can't find it right now when I want it, but it's just amazing to me that this is still so much a part of the culture, even though they claim here we go. The word perro-judio is a common thing, which means Jewish dog. That's a common slur to just hurl at anybody in Spain. Judiata, which is a dirty trick or a cruel act, is still a common term in Spain. And judio, which is associated with people who are usurers, who would bilk people out of money at high interest rates, is a common term in Spanish language, in Spanish lingo. And they drink something that's a combination, it sounds horrible, of lemonade and red wine, and it is called matar judios, which means kill the Jews, murder the Jews. And there was a village in northern Spain that until the year 2014 was called, and my Spanish is really bad, Castillo Mata Judios, which means kill the Jews. So, it's still somewhat ingrained in the culture, even though they have made this attempt to change things.
Tim,
Yes, go ahead, Flossie.
am I on? I'm
Yes,
just
hi.
checking. Okay. You hear within the past few years of groups of crypto Jews in New Mexico. How did it come about that when they came here to the United States, this group formed and then they had no idea of their possible background?
I've read stories of some of these crypto Jews who said, we light candles on Friday night. We don't know really why we do it, but we do it. We don't understand the significance of it, but we've always done it.
New Mexico. I mean,
Right. And so we light these candles, but they don't really understand the history. They never looked into it. Now there has been a movement for them to look into their history and to study their background. But for years, these were just things they did because, like in your family, if on Saturday night, you always had grilled cheese and tomato soup. You always had grilled cheese and tomato soup. Well, on Friday night, we always lit candles. We don't know why we lit them, but we lit them. So we always lit candles. It was the tradition. And then now with this opening up of the whole business of crypto Jews, people are learning to study their background, their history, their genealogy, and they are finding the roots, Jewish roots, the Sephardic Jewish roots that they have that they never considered before.
Remember that the Spanish Empire extended all the way up through, when Cortez came over, he didn't just stop in Mexico City. I mean, he sent explorers up all the way through, and New Mexico was part of, Mexico at the time, as well as part of Texas was part of Mexico.
Well,
so
Florida.
Sure there were, Florida. Florida almost became, if you study history of South Carolina and Georgia, the whole reason for Georgia, for one of the main reasons to put Oglethorpe there was to prevent the Spanish from too far up the coast here.
Exactly.
So, there was a lot of Spanish influence.
They didn't want those Catholics coming in. Remember that in early Savannah, when Jews were permitted to own land and settle in Savannah, Catholics were not.
Right.
Yeah. Catholics and lawyers.
Elements of Savannah's history is the Roman Catholics were kept out, but the Jews could come in.
Well, the Jews could come in, but I think it was they were not welcomed, right? Until the Jewish doctor came in with the second ship, and basically he was the one that helped cure the plague.
Exactly. So
Lawyers, they should
you
have kept
do
more
something-
lawyers that way.
then they'll let you in because, he was able to do something for the good of the country or the good of the people. So, yeah.
Do we know what the population distribution is in Spain today of Muslims?
Good question. I do not know that. No.
It's certainly got to be larger than the 50,000, which I thought was one of the also reasons, that you gave an interesting one about, in 67 or whenever it was that, Spain finally recognized Israel in order to get into the EU. There were many other conditions. We were there at around the time when they were applying for EU status. And they had to meet so many requirements that, they tried to get everybody up to what the German status was. Germany was kind of like the goal for the EU economically. And, Germany was a very wealthy country. Spain was a very poor country with very poor infrastructure. And they went into a massive road building campaign at that time and large amounts of taxation in a very poor country, to try and improve the infrastructure and try and improve commerce and things like that in order to bring them up to the standards that the EU would, be acceptable. So there were whole loads of obstacles that were placed, on their part there.
Well, it's interesting because in Spain today, they have, refurbished, as I said, many of the old synagogues. They don't have congregations, but the buildings are there. And many of the synagogues that are in Spain look very much like mosques because of the influence of Islam there. So they have this very Moorish sort of look to them. Which is gorgeous, and is beautiful. And we have some, in the United States that have this sort of Moorish architecture as well. And shops that sell Judaica, we have it, or, at Mikveh Israel, the gift shop that sell things like that are mostly run by Christians. They're not run by Jews.
Well, the Alhambra, of course, had been the church for part of the time as well, after they defeated the Muslims in that area. And I think now, they've restored it to its splendor pretty much, as being a Muslim shrine. But there was a large Christian church that had populated the Alhambra for a long time.
Right. I mean, I intend to go into Spain while we're there. I mean, once we have our EU, we have our visa, I really want to go in and see the Jewish history of Spain, what's there. I'm fascinated to see the restored synagogues, even if there's, someone just, Kara says 2.1 Muslims, 2.1 million Jews in Spain? That's not the number.
No.
Okay, 2.1 Muslims in Spain? Okay, does not surprise me. Does not surprise me there would be such a large Muslim population because—
Well, it's still very small compared to 70 million total.
Right, 73, 74 million is the population, but still much larger than the Jewish population.
Yeah.
If you go to Spain, will you have an updated class?
I could do like a guest class, from across the ocean. Let's see, if I was doing class at 6:30 from Portugal, that would be 11:30 p.m. Portugal. So I'd have to make sure I got a nap that day.
Part two.
Right.
Well, you can give us some tapas recipes as well.
Yes, and I'll share some, recipes and, share some good wine varietals that I discover over there, because apparently they've got all kinds of grapes over there that are I just read somewhere that Portugal has like 180 different varietals of grapes that they make wine on. Wow. For such a small country, that's a lot of grape varietals. No, but I intend to try all 180 and I'll report that. Not in the same day. I'll space it out over, some time. So, all right. Once again, the rabbi has something at 8, so I got to make sure we're out of here. We got a few minutes. So if there's any last minute questions, comments, feel free.
I just wanted to mention one other thing. We were at the Jewish Museum in New York many, many years ago, and they have a magnificent exhibit. I think it was in the permanent exhibit of some of the Jews and the ways that they used to hide some of the Jewish relics. They had these large sleeves, and in the large sleeves, they would put these Bibles, Jewish Bibles or prayer books that were basically almost the size of your thumb. And they would hide them inside the lining of the sleeves and some of the other articles as well, in order to basically, keep them hidden and, still be able to say they had a Jew. I doubt if you could read it, you'd need a magnifying glass, but just as a symbol of holding it. It's
interesting. Now, when you are in a situation where, every little thing is could possibly give you away and bring about dire consequences, you get very, very clever and very creative with what you have to do. And I think that's a testament to the fact that there were people who did not want to let go of their Judaism. So.
Tim, I think Noel and Larry, I don't know if they got the email that Rabbi Haas is not having his class tomorrow.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so if you were planning to tune in to Rabbi Haas's class tomorrow, it is canceled. So you'll see a blank screen where the rabbi should be. Maybe he'll set up a cutout of himself, but he's not going to be speaking. So, okay, thank you for sharing that. Any last minute comments, questions? Thank you all for.
I have just one question about, I noticed that they're advertising food again. Did we find a new caterer?
Mitch is actually doing the to-go Shabbat dinners to go on Friday. You picked them up Friday morning, Friday afternoon. Yes, but it's still just a to-go basis where you pick up the food on Friday for Shabbat dinner on Friday night. And I don't know, who knows when we're going to be back to kiddush lunches in the social hall like it used to be. God willing, it will happen at some point.
They're going to do twice a month services, the same as that was the original plan.
No, actually starting in June, services will be Saturday Shabbat services will be weekly.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Also limited reservations and
Yes,
things.
for now, they're going to limit the number of people until they feel more comfortable, but there will be a Shabbat morning service on Saturday every week starting in June.
I got you. Okay. And high holiday services will definitely be in person?
I don't know how much discussion the board and the worship committee has done on that.
Far away, Larry.
Yeah.
And and since I'm flying the coop, I don't know, maybe they're not going to tell me. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your
Thank you
evening.
very much.
Tim.
Very, very, very fine job. Great research.
And next week it's the Jews in Hollywood. So if you
Hollywood,
are,
hey.
and, hooray for Hollywood and all that stuff. So
Marilyn Monroe.
yes, exactly. Yes, one of the most famous
Sammy
converts.
Davis.
One of the most famous converts to Judaism,
Right.
and Elizabeth Taylor as well.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
Oh,
Elizabeth
wow.
Yes,
Yeah.
and two of the famous, beauty icons of, the golden age of Hollywood, Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, both converted to Judaism. So
And then Sammy Davis Jr.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not a beauty, but a great voice.
But a great entertainer. I mean, he was known as Mr. Entertainment. So there you go. All right,
Thank
everybody.
you, Tim. Bye-bye.
Have a good night.
Bye.
See you later.
Thank you.